In this session, we're going to take a look at my second part of Microsoft Intune Suite. Specifically, we're going to talk about deploying applications and managing security. So if you want to learn, stay tuned. Are you ready? Greetings, my fellow YouTubers. So nice to see you. Today, we're going to continue in my session on Intune Suite. Specifically, we're going to look at how to deploy applications, as well as the all-important subject of dealing with endpoint security. So, if you've not subscribed to the channel, we love subscribers. So bump that subscribe button, ring the bell, and you won't miss out on the good stuff in the future. And if you've got questions about this or any of my other sessions, of course, just get those down below. So I think without any further ado, let's jump in and let's start learning. So I'm starting here in Intune, and I'm coming down to the app node, and here of course we can view our different apps for all our different platforms, so Windows, iPad, iOS, Mac OS, and so on. So I'm going to come into apps, and to create an app or install an app, then this is great. So you don't need CDs or DVDs. You can bring them in from the App Store. So Windows apps, you can come in from either the classic App Store or the modern App Store. Now the classic, of course, is closing. So the other things you can also bring in are things like links and into your browsers, which is really useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm coming up to the new App Store here, and I'm just going to click on Select. And now essentially you can just search for a particular app within the store. And there are literally thousands of apps. So for example, I'm just going to type in Zoom here. And you can see that there's a number of different platforms. So universal Windows apps, of course, then you've got classic Win32-bit based apps as well. Just to mention that if you want to use classic 32-bit based apps, then you need to configure them into an Intune file. So in the app properties, of course, you can go in and have a look at the app properties. You can configure in which user mode that you want to install the app. Do you want to categorize the app perhaps? So I can say either productivity or maybe compliance or something like that. Again, you can add more details into the app, some notes and so on. So once you have completed that, the next thing that you can do is, again, if there's a logo, so sometimes you can download a logo, of course, that's just a regular graphics file. So is the app required? Is the available for enrolled devices? Or the really nice cool thing about this is you can also uninstall apps as well, which makes it great for upgrades and things like that. So I'm going to assign this to my sales team, and of course I'm going to say it's required for my sales team. So again, you can either include, you can exclude, so you can make it really, really flexible if you want to. So as I mentioned, different categories, so either it's required, if it's available, so users can go off and they can browse and they can install the app if it's available. So now that I've done that, I'm just going to go ahead and clicking on Create here, and you can see that that app is now available for those users. So when those users start clicking in, that status page will then change. And again, you can go into the properties, you can customize this, you can change this at any time that you want. So there you go, that's installing an app. So just like devices, of course, apps will also have profiles. So software profiles, you can go in and you can create app profiles. You can create what we call an app protection policy, a configuration profile, and again there are different profiles for different platforms. So again, super easy to do. So if I go into, for example, an app protection policy, I can create a protection policy for, again, a specific platform that I want to work with. So you can see you can do Mac OS, you can do Windows, and so on. Here's one I made earlier. So I can simply go in and I can go into the properties here and I can go ahead and edit the properties on that. So you've got basic information, then you've got the actual apps themselves, and then you've got the data protection mechanisms that you want to do for that. So again, do you want it to be available? Yes or no? Do you want what's the target device that this app's for? So we can configure that. Then once that's configured, the next part, I'll just go back. The next part is actually configuring the application protection. So in here, I can specify the app protection policy. So do I want certain restrictions to be switched on? Do I want the app to be available? Do I want it to do things like cut, copy, paste? You can specify what type of data are you going to allow, for example, users to store their data on the device, or do you want it just to be available offline? And again, so you can see that there's lots and lots of different options here. Other things that we can do, you can also say, is this app available on, are you going to allow users to view the data on any device? So, there are so many different options here as well. Do you want to restrict cut, copy, paste? I love that one. Do you want to kind of restrict any third-party keyboards, or do you want to encrypt the data? Do you want to change the functionality of that data as well? And things like printing in particular can be quite a sensitive subject for companies. So using this particular app, you might not want your users being able to print. So again, that's really super useful. So this is just an example of some of the settings that you can have then in a protection policy. So now that I've done that, I'm just going to do a quick review. I'm going to do a quick save there, and again, you can go through this and have a quick look at an overview of this. And then once you've done that, of course, that's the properties. So once you've assigned this to a group of users or devices, those settings would then be applied. All right. So finally, you've got things like access requirements. So this is really nice. So even though the user has been authenticated, of course, you might have an app on, let's say, an iPad, and your kids play games. So you can go in and you can put additional security settings in for your users. So it requires, for example, a separate PIN or a separate biometric and so on. You've also got things like conditional launch as well. So you can set conditions on the launch. So again, you can set restrictions on, the number of PIN attempts. So if somebody's trying to open up the app, you can say, how long the app is offline for before it needs to be re-authenticated. So really quite detailed stuff here. You've also got things like device conditions as well. So again, things like jailbroken devices. You might not want the app to run on jailbroken devices. So again, it's all about increasing and improving your overall security. So that's very cool. So that, my friends, is an app protection policy. So something else, of course, which is equally important are things like configuration policies. And I'm often asked, Andy, how do I do a configuration policy for Office apps? Well, of course, you don't need to deploy Office apps. I mean, you can, but users can simply go ahead and they can download the apps from the Office portal. So one of the things that you can do in Intune is you can create app configuration policies for Microsoft 365 apps. So if you're familiar with the likes of group policy, then this will be super easy for you. So you can see I've created a policy already. So I'm going to go in and just edit that policy. I'm going to click on next, and you can see that you can go in, I can configure the policy. I've already assigned this policy to the marketing group, as you can see. So now that I've configured that policy, of course, again, I can go back in anytime and change these policy settings. Now, the problem with the policies in this view is it's a little bit different to group policy. You can see there's over 2,200 policies here. So there's like gazillions of policies, and obviously just looking at it like this would be quite difficult. So one of the things that you can do is if you can go in, well, you can filter, of course. So you can filter by the different policy types, but more importantly, you can go in through the search area here. So if I just scroll along and click in, and let's say type in PowerPoint, and then do a search or next, you'll then see that it starts to filter everything for PowerPoint. So now I can simply go into that PowerPoint attribute, and of course you can switch it on. And what this is doing, of course, is this is configuring it in the registry. So you can either configure it for a device, or you can configure it for a per user setting here. So essentially you can go through each of these configuration settings for the apps. How cool is that? So once you've done that, you simply click on next and then just simply update the policy. It really is that simple. Now, just before I leave this area, I just want to mention something called policy sets. Now, policy sets can be created from either the device node or from the software node or the app node. And as you can see, it's really nice because you can obviously create individual policies, but the fact that there's a wizard here and you can create all the policies in one go. And once you've created them, you can then assign them. So simply just give your policy set a name. So I'm just going to call this my Oslo policy 1. I'm going to click on next. And again, you can choose obviously to select the particular apps that you want. So for example, Zoom, which is not available here, but you can see if you had installed any apps, they would be selected here. Now, along with the apps, of course, you could add things like configuration policies. So if you've created any configuration policies, again, I've not created any here in this example, but you could simply just add those in as well. Now, you don't have to have those. So you can, I can bring in a protection policy, for example, and there's the one I created earlier. So I can just click on select. And now that I click on next, now comes the device options. So again, it says, okay, select the, for example, configuration profile. So there's the device configuration profile that I created. Do I have a device compliance policy? Yes, I do. So I can just bring that in. So, once you've created all of these kind of individual policies, you can add them into this kind of policy set. And once you've got the policy set, of course, I can now click on to assignments. So you've got things like, you can see that it's gone in, things like autopilot. So the autopilot profiles go in, you've got device profiles, you've got the apps, and you can configure the whole thing then as this package. Okay, so again, just select the enrollment status page if you have one, click on next, and now I can simply add this to a group. So I'm just going to scroll down and I'm going to deploy this to my sales users. Now, in addition, you can also, of course, exclude specific groups there if you want to. So just click on next, off I go and create, and there you have it. I've now created my policy package. So we now look to the subject of security, and of course one of the other main features of Intune Suite is its security features. So I'm going to come into endpoint security, and just before, of course, you can go onto the main page and you can obviously get an overview of everything. So here on the main page, we get a nice overview of things like baselines. You can view all of your devices and see, for example, which devices are compliant. In this example, I'm only using a single machine, but you can see it's a Windows machine, and in fact, it is compliant there. So it gives me the status information. Of course, I can retire it, I can wipe this, I can reset it, I can do an antivirus scan, and so on. So I can come into, for example, device compliance here. I can see that, it's compliant. At the moment, it's complaining because it's actually switched off. That's the reason why it's complaining. But other than that, everything looks pretty good here. So device compliance policy, you can see it filters through, and you can view it either as a whole or on a device basis as well. Other things that you've got, you can also see apps, you can see whether it's a member of a group, and so on. So looking at endpoint security, what I want to do is one of the most important things that you're probably going to want to do, especially if you're a new customer, is you're going to want to create some kind of security baseline. So a baseline is an absolute minimum set of security requirements that you want to kind of enforce. And you can see here that out of the box, there are a number of kind of minimum baselines that Microsoft kind of recommend. So you got one for each of the different platforms. But of course, if you want to create your own, you're quite within your right to go in here. So I'm going to go in, I'm just going to crawl this, say Oslo. I'm in Oslo at the moment, so I'll just call this my Oslo base policy. So in my base policy, of course, you've got things like, for example, attack surface reduction rules. So remember, these are minimum rules. And then again, Microsoft will make some recommendations here. So again, you're quite within your right to override them depending on what the requirements are for your organization. So things like, blocking executable content, blocking Office applications from creating child processes, potentially obfuscated scripts and things like that. Block Win32-bit calls or API calls. So you can choose. You've got BitLocker rules here, so you can configure a BitLocker policy. And remember, this is your baseline settings. So you could create a set of baseline rules, and then, of course, on top of that, you could create additional security rules which are specific for, let's say, a particular department. So, for example, if your users have got laptops, for example, you definitely want to deploy BitLocker with TPM protection. You might want to deploy things like Device Guard, prevent users from booting up with other OSs, and things like preventing users from installing unknown devices on their machines. Direct memory access guard, protecting memory. You've got things like firewall rules, you've got Windows Defender rules, and so on. So I think you'll find this super useful. And again, minimum set of requirements. So things like FTP here, for example. Do you want to switch on, configure different firewall configurations? So for example, private. Do you want to enforce a certificate revocation list for, again, any certificates that are potentially expired? So again, you can see this is super useful, and I simply just click Next from here, and once you've done that, I can then obviously say, hey, I want to apply this to a group, and it could be a group of users or a group of devices, and so I'm going to assign this to my sales team. So there you have it. I have now created a not a compliance policy, but a baseline security policy for my users. So in addition to the baseline security settings, of course, the other thing that you can also configure are the individual settings themselves. So, for example, you can configure things like antivirus, the disk encryption settings, firewall. You can, obviously you can configure them in the baselines, but again, you might have, for example, different sets of groups or different users, different sets of equipment, of course, and you want to have different settings. So again, as an example here, you can see I can go into the antivirus settings. And again, we have just an overall summary page of your, antivirus settings of all the machines in your organization. I can go in and I can view things like unhealthy endpoints. If there's any potential active malware going on here, you get the statistics. So if there's any kind of, as I said, unhealthy endpoints here, if there's any kind of active malware cases here. And the other thing, by the way, that you can also use are things like reusable settings. So if there's any settings that you want to add, then you can use these in multiple policies, for example. So that's kind of useful. And of course, it uses the 9 different scanning engines that Microsoft use within its Defender suite. So again, I can simply just come in here. I can simply just create a policy here. And of course, you can choose an antivirus policy for, am I using Windows 11? Am I using Mac OS? Am I using Windows 10? Are you using servers? So again, you simply choose your platform here. And once you've selected your platform, then you can select a profile. So is it Defender just antivirus with exclusions, Defender antivirus, or do you want to use the Windows security experience? So I'm just going to choose the Defender here, click on Next. Again, I can give my policy a name here. I'll just call it Oslo Defender policy. I can give it a description. And again, I can click Next here. So now that I've got that, you can see just like before, I get those kind of policy settings here. So I'll just give you a demo of some of these because this is quite long. So do I want to allow active scanning? Do I want to defend against, watch things like behavioral monitoring? It looks for unusual behavior with antivirus. Do you want to allow things like a full disk scan, removable drives? Absolutely, of course. Intrusion protection, by the way, this is kind of legacy technology. I don't know if you'd still use this. If you did use this technology, probably Defender for Endpoint would replace this. So I'm not convinced that you would use that. So again, I'm just going to leave that as not configured. All right. Other things that you've got allow scanning of downloaded files and attachments. Yeah, probably you might want to do that. Things like real-time monitoring. So I'm sure you get the idea. So as I said, you can go through literally tons of different settings here. So once you've gone through that, then I would simply click on Next. And of course, who do you now want to assign this policy to? So again, you can add it to individual groups, all users, or all devices. And again, you can also exclude them as well. So there you have it. Pretty simple. There you are, the antivirus. Now, of course, to be honest, you would probably set that up with the baselines. But like I said, you can go into things like disk encryption if you want to deploy BitLocker on a Windows machine, or the encryption on a Mac or something like that. You've got things like Windows firewall rules. So, of course, every endpoint has a firewall. So if you've got devices that are attached to mobile device management, and with their firewall switched off, this can catch those devices, for example, and you can then create additional firewall rules here. Endpoint Privilege Manager rocks, actually. This is that new feature. Now, if you were on one of my sessions a couple of weeks ago, I had Jeremy Chapman, who's the director of Microsoft 365. Jeremy did a great demo of this, by the way. So I'll put that link in the description below. If you've not seen it, then it's on my site. Okay, then you've got things like endpoint detection and response. So obviously things like attack surface reduction rules. So again, things like closing ports, shutting down services, things that you don't necessarily need. So again, I can go into that. Again, you can you've got the Windows Security Center settings here as well. So I can configure that. If I've got a configuration file, so I can put that in, and you can see it'll ask me for that XML file, which is all the kind of configuration settings. Beyond that, let me just come out of that. What else have we got? Other things. You've got things like account protection, which is great, and that protects against people trying to masquerade as you. You've got things like device compliance. Now, device compliance I actually covered in the last session. So if you're interested in conditional access, they are available in my identity playlist. So check those out. So I suppose the final topic that we should really talk about are the topics of Windows updates. And updates are super important, and there's an awful lot of confusion as to how they work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down here, and as we can see, we have something here called update rings for Windows 10 and later. Then you've got something called feature updates and quality updates. So first up, let's talk about update rings. Now, Microsoft have a service called Windows Update for Business. And this is essentially where you can come in and you can create different rings within your organization. So ultimately, if you're a very large company with thousands of users, you wouldn't simply have a single ring because it would bombard your network. So you might have different rings for, let's say, different departments or different needs and so on. So for example, I'm going to create, as I said, I'm in Oslo this week, so I'm going to create this, I'm going to call this Oslo Ring 1, and I'm going to click Next, and it says, okay, Microsoft product updates. So of course, along with Windows updates, one of the clever things about this is you can bring not just Windows updates, but you can also bring product updates like Microsoft 365 or Microsoft Office and things like that. And you can also bring updates for drivers as well. How cool is that? Now, as I said, there are two types of updates. There are quality updates and there are feature updates. Now, quality updates are kind of really important updates, really important for the operating system. So things that you wouldn't want to not have. Whereas feature updates are things like, okay, they're not essential, but they would not be nice to have. So new features, additions, and so on. Now, if you're a small company, again, this is not really an issue to you. But if you're a large company, you may have thousands of machines within your organization. So you maybe want to defer some of those updates. So again, this is the defer time. You can defer them for X number of days. So quality updates, you can defer for up to 30 days. Again, feature updates, you can defer for up to 6 months. So then you've got Windows 10 devices. So if it detects any Windows 10 devices still on your network, then of course you get that upgrade for free. So I could say, yeah, okay, let's do that. And then you've got things like uninstall period. So again, how long is it before people can uninstall any kind of updates? Do you want to enable pre-release builds? So pre-release, of course, allows you to join, for example, the Windows Insider preview program. This is awesome. So again, we have a number of channels within that, the beta and dev channels. So again, you might create a policy for, let's say, your IT team so that you can get updates and have a look at the products before anybody else. And this helps better support. Other things that you've got things like the user experience settings. So how do you want the updates to be installed? Do you want to notify the users of the download or just kind of automatically deploy them either at maintenance or at a scheduled time? And again, you can choose those times, whatever meets your requirements. Do you want to allow restart checks? Do you want to allow the option to pause updates? So again, you're giving the users those options, all right? Again, you can change notifications and you can also set deadlines as well. So again, it will announce to the user that, hey, there's a new update available here. You either are required to install it or requested to install it, and they can. So are you going to make that mandatory, or are you going to, so you've got the option here. Do you want to do an auto boot? Do you want to give them a grace period before they're forced to deploy those updates? So again, I guess you get the idea. So I'm going to click on next. Of course, now I apply that policy to my group. So again, I'm going to assign it to my sales team. Again, you can exclude that as well. So I get the overall view of everything, click on create, and there you go. I've now created my Oslo ring. So now that that's my Oslo ring, now we can configure both the quality and feature updates. So now I can go in to say, right, this is my Oslo, and I can say this is my F1 policy, and you can choose different features to update. So depending on the version that you're working with, you can choose the different versions. So again, I'm going to choose this particular version of Windows 11. And then I have rollout options. So do you want to make the updates as soon as possible? Okay. Do you want to make them available on a specific date? So I can choose a specific date. Or you might want to say, I want to gradually introduce those. So again, you can deploy them to different groups within your organization. Again, if you're a small company, this is not going to be an issue. But if you're a large company, again, you can potentially have thousands of machines here. So essentially what the feature updates does, it allows you to defer some of these updates depending on the rules that you've configured. And it's such a cool feature. So again, I can now set that to my sales team, click on save, click on next, I get a nice overview, and now I click on create. So finally, of course, we have quality updates, and quality updates are kind of more mission critical updates. So I'm going to call this my Q1 policy here. Again, I can put in a little description, and it talks about the fact that, you know, quality updates are super important. And again here, expedite installation of updates if you've got like older machines. So ultimately what you're looking for is to have a set of machines throughout your organization that is consistent. It has a consistent build. There is nothing worse than having 1,000 machines all with different versions of an OS. It's chaotic. Number of days to wait before a restart is required. So again, I always say kind of a day is fine, because it gives users the opportunity before it's actually gone ahead and it's enforced. And again, simply, I just come back in here and I add in my sales team there. That is deploying updates as part of Intune or Microsoft Endpoint Manager, whichever you want to call it. So that's the Intune Admin Center and deploying updates. So there you have it, Microsoft Intune Suite, applications and dealing with security. Hey, listen, I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did and you want to come back, then bump that subscribe button, ring that bell up there, and you'll be notified of any new videos and postings. And of course, if you have questions, I love those. So please, of course, as always, just get those down below and I'll do my very best for you. That's it for this time. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. I'm Andy Malone. Stay safe. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.